Ok. Bueno, bienvenidas a todos, a todas, a todos a este webinar, a este círculo de palabra que se organiza desde Deuda por Clima Latinoamérica. Nosotros somos un movimiento que tiene actualmente presencia en más de 33 países, que juntos luchamos por la anulación incondicional de las deudas del sur global. Y en esta ocasión, en el marco del Día Internacional de la Mujer, organizamos este círculo de palabra con unas especialistas muy importantes para nosotros, para nosotras, que han guiado nuestro movimiento, que le dan cuerpo y le dan voz a esta lucha contra la deuda. Queremos agradecer de todo corazón a Agnès, a Yolanda, a Shereen y a Lucy por entrar a esta llamada, por guiarnos en esto. Y sin más, les recuerdo que si quieren tomar parte de la palabra, que si quieren participar, utilicen audífonos con cable y con micrófono para que podamos escucharles. Los intérpretes, no sé si ya empezaron a interpretar en la lengua asignada. Pueden, hasta abajo, pueden entrar a... Hay un...
Diana, wait 1 second, please. Apparently
Ujú.
there's problem with the English interpretation that doesn't work.
Ujú. A ver, Katy, ¿estás ya hablando? Katy,
Aquí estoy.
perfecto. Entonces, ¿ya estabas traduciendo?
Sí, ¿se
Ok,
me escucha?
sí,
Ok.
ok. Y Eric, también tú ya estabas traduciendo a francés. Ok, a ver, perfecto. ¿Escuchan todos bien? Ok. Bueno, me parece que Eric ya está traduciendo. También Katy ya empezó la traducción. Y Susana. Pues bueno, queremos agradecer a nuestras participantes por estar aquí, también a todas las miembros y miembros de Deuda por Clima por unirse a esta llamada, por ser parte de este movimiento. Y sin más, bueno, les recuerdo lo de los audífonos, el micrófono, y podemos empezar a revisar las biografías de nuestras participantes. Le cedo la palabra a Alicia de Deuda por Clima Latinoamérica para dar inicio a esto.
Gracias, Diana. Gracias a todos por estar aquí. Bueno, yo quisiera presentar primero a Agnès Adélaïde Metougou. Ella es una activista camerunés que lucha contra la deuda ilegítima y por los derechos humanos. Es miembro de la Plataforma de Información y Acción sobre la Deuda, PFIAD, miembro de Dynamic Citoyen, una red de organizaciones de la sociedad civil que trabaja por el seguimiento independiente de las políticas públicas y realiza acciones de incidencia. También es miembro de la Coordinación África del CADTM África. Ella aboga por la deuda climática incidiendo en la interacción entre la deuda soberana y el clima, así como la deuda y el extractivismo. Participó en la Asamblea General de Mujeres Africanas sobre el Cambio Climático en el 2022 y 2023 en Nigeria, donde compartió su análisis sobre la deuda pública de Camerún y sus consecuencias para las poblaciones, en particular para las mujeres. También contribuyó a la creación de un comité ad hoc para reforzar la coordinación de Dynamic Citoyen en 2015. Agnes es una mujer comprometida que defiende los intereses del pueblo camerunés frente a las violaciones de derechos humanos, los acreedores internacionales y las instituciones financieras internacionales.
Alicia, can you speak a little bit slower for the interpretation, please?
Yes, sorry. Um, I see that there was no the English translation, maybe it was not working well. Do I repeat the biography?
Yes, please repeat it.
Yes, just go ahead.
Can you hear me now?
Okay, I repeat the biography then.
Moi, je vous entends bien, mais je n'ai pas entendu Alicia.
Ah, d'accord.
Agnès, est-ce
Ouais.
que tu as sélectionné le canal français également pour avoir la traduction espagnol-français? Okay, Alicia, just go ahead.
Ok, bueno, para presentar nuevamente a Agnès. Agnès es una activista camerunés que lucha contra la deuda
qui
ilegítima.
lutte contre la dette illégitime et pour les droits humains. Elle est membre de la plateforme d'information et action sur la dette.
Dynamic Citoyenne, a network of civil society organizations working for independent monitoring of public policies and undertaking advocacy actions. She is also a member of the Africa Coordination of CADTM Africa. She advocates for climate debt, emphasizing the interaction between sovereign debt and climate, as well as debt and extractivism. She participated in the African Women's General Assembly on Climate Change in 2022 and 2023 in Nigeria, where she shared her analysis on Cameroon's public debt and its consequences for the populations, particularly women. She also contributed to the establishment of an ad hoc committee to strengthen the coordination of Dynamique Citoyenne in 2015. Agnès is a committed woman who defends the interests of the Cameroonian people against human rights violations, international creditors, and international financial institutions.
Ahora leeré la biografía de Shereen Talaat. Shereen es feminista y activista con más de una década de experiencia en la
Shereen
de coaliciones
is a feminist and activist with over a decade of experience in building coalitions around social and economic rights. She is the director and founder of the MENA Fem movement. Committed to economic development and ecological justice, she advocates for rights-based economic policies with a particular focus on debt justice, feminism, and climate justice. In 2022, she was recognized as one of the most influential voices on climate financing, alongside 10 other activists from across the globe. She continues to make significant contributions to the global dialogue, striving for transformative change and justice on a broader scale. With 18 years of activism, Shereen worked to connect local and global movements for rights, which was crucial for her efforts to promote justice within the global financial architecture, including the policies of international financial institutions. Additionally, she served as a member of the Advisory Council for Civil Society Organizations of the President of the World Trade Organization.
Ahora para presentar a Lucy Caballero. Lucy Caballero es doctora en Ciencias Sociales y socióloga por la Universidad de Buenos Aires. Es docente de la materia Economía Feminista en la Universidad Nacional de 3 de Febrero y en la Universidad de Avellaneda. Es coautora de Una lectura feminista de la deuda.
She holds a doctorate in social sciences and a sociologist from University of Buenos Aires. She teaches the course Feminist Economics at the National University of 3 de Febrero and at the University of Avellaneda. She is a co-author of a feminist reading of Debt, published in Argentina by the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation in 2019, in Brazil by Crisao Humana Editora 2019, in Italy by Hombre Corte forthcoming, and in English by Pluto Press 2021. She is also a co-author along with Veronica Gago and Silvia Federici of the book Who Owes Whom? Transnational Essays on Financial Disobedience, published by Tinta Limón in Argentina and by Editorial Elefante in Brazil. In a few months, her latest co-authored book, La Casa como Laboratorio, Finanzas, Vivienda y Trabajo Esencial, will be released in the United States. She is a member of the Ni Una Menos collective, where she works on articulating the agenda of economic violence. Yolanda, during the last 2 decades, has been very involved in local, national, and international social movements, participating in campaigns related to development financing, debt, human rights, feminism, the environment, peace, trade, and responsible consumption. She has worked for over 10 years as a researcher, campaign and communication coordinator at the Observatory of Debt and Globalization, and as a consultant. Since 2019, she has been working at Eurodad in the debt team. focusing particularly on the interconnections between debt and climate crisis, as well as the deficiencies in the international financial architecture contributing to various articles and publications. So we have nothing more to say at the moment as far as biographies, and we want to thank everyone for being here. Now, Alicia will talk.
Gracias, Diana. Bueno, la primera pregunta es para Lucy.
The first
Lucy,
question is for
¿por qué
Lucy.
analizar la deuda externa es relevante para la lucha
Lucy,
feminista?
why is
¿Cómo
analyzing external debt
esta,
relevant for
la
the
deuda
feminist
y la
struggle?
deuda
And
impacta
how does the debt
Latinoamérica? Si nos
crisis
pudieses contar
particularly
sobre el
impact Latin
liderazgo de las
America
mujeres de la región.
and the leadership positions of women in the region?
Bueno, muchas gracias.
Thank you.
Primero quiero, bueno, destacar que el
I'd like to
espacio de discusión
emphasize
internacionalista para nosotras de Ni Una Menos
that
ha sido muy
the
importante,
international space for dialogue is very
sobre todo porque
important,
comprendemos que no hay
especially
otra
because we
forma de luchar contra la
understand
deuda
that there's
fuera
no
del
way
interior
to
de nuestros
fight
países,
against debt
y también
only
porque
within
el
our own
internacionalismo ha sido un
borders,
gesto muy
and
importante
because
del movimiento feminista en los
internationalism
últimos años.
is a very important part of the feminist struggle lately.
Nosotras venimos
We come,
haciendo un esfuerzo muy grande
we have been
por denunciar las
really
políticas del Fondo
focusing
Monetario y
on
la Comisión en
denouncing the
Argentina,
IMF's
también
actions in
está,
Argentina,
haciendo esto
which is
en otros países de la
also
región.
doing this to other
Desde el
countries in the
año
region.
2018, el Fondo
In
Monetario
2018, the
Internacional vuelve a
IMF
Argentina después de muchos años
came
donde
back to
se
Argentina
había
after many
tenido
years, after many years in
ningún tipo de
which there had
relación. Y
not
en
been
ese
any
momento
relationship
comienza
with them. And in that year,
una gran
what
crisis económica que nos
began
lleva
was
hoy a
a
tener un gobierno de ultraderecha.
major
Esa
economic
va a ser una
crisis,
gran
which today has led us
uno
to
de los
have a
argumentos
very
que
right-wing
quiero
government. And this
compartir
is
con
one of
ustedes hoy.
the biggest
También porque
arguments I would
termina
like to share
articulando
with
de
you
alguna
today,
manera al movimiento feminista como enemigo.
and has also seen the feminist movement as an enemy.
La primer acuerdo con el Fondo Monetario en el año
The first
2018 fue
agreement with IMF
inició un proceso de
began
devaluación del trabajo muy importante, ¿no? El
a
movimiento feminista en
devaluation
ese
of
momento
work in Argentina.
era uno de los
And the
más
feminist
activos
movement in
a nivel
Argentina
mundial
was
en
very
las demandas
active
por
on the
el
international
reconocimiento del trabajo
scale,
no remunerado, por mejores servicios públicos.
especially for public
Estaban
services,
como nunca
for
en la discusión y en la conversación pública.
non-paid work, and this was in the
Sin
public
embargo,
discussion.
en el mismo año que el movimiento feminista se vuelve masivo, el endeudamiento
In the
externo
same
o el
year
Fondo
that the
Monetario
feminist
de alguna
movement
manera
became huge,
encorsetó nuestras demandas
the
y puso un
IMF
límite,
began to put
haciendo
limits
que
on
el
feminist
Estado
demands,
las energías y la producción en Argentina se
causing the
destine a pagar la deuda
production
principalmente. ¿Qué
in
pasó con la
Argentina
realidad de las
became
mujeres
only
después de
focused on repaying the
2018?
debt.
Empieza
So
un
what
proceso
happened
de
in
depreciación muy
2018?
importante del salario. Del
Okay,
salario y
devaluation of
de los subsidios
incomes
sociales. Aquí en
and
Argentina
also of
tenemos
government subsidies.
una gran parte de las mujeres de lo que aquí
A
llamamos la
large
economía
part
popular, que son
of
trabajos
women in the
que
popular
no están
sector of
formalizados,
work,
pero que están organizados en un
informal work,
sindicato
but
alternativo,
that is organized in an
empezaron a tener
alternative
una
work
la
union.
capacidad del poder adquisitivo de sus salarios.
They began to
Empezaron
lose the
tener que
acquisitive
recurrir al
power
endeudamiento para vivir,
of their
haciendo una
salaries.
transacción muy evidente entre deuda externa y deuda de las familias, algo que hemos
There
también
began to be a
trabajado
relationship
mucho de
between the
investigación,
external
porque hay una
debt and
correlación
family
directa,
debt.
¿no? Con el nivel de endeudamiento, el retiro del Estado para
Also,
proveer áreas
the
importantes de la reproducción social y el
distancing of
nivel de
the
endeudamiento de la
government as
población.
far
Un
as
endeudamiento que
providing
estuvo,
public
está y
services
estuvo muy feminizado.
and
Entonces,
the growing debt
vivimos un
among the
proceso de depreciación
population,
del
particularly
trabajo
along
y del
feminized
salario que
bodies.
arrastramos hasta hoy de manera muy cruel. Nunca se ha vuelto a recuperar el salario desde que el Fondo Monetario Internacional está en
These salaries
Argentina.
have not
Está funcionando
been
como
able to be
una forma de
recuperated or
criminalizar
regained.
una relación de fuerzas entre clases sociales, esa
And this
deuda,
has only made more
y
rigid the
que
difference between social
de
classes.
alguna manera pone el límite máximo hasta donde pueden llegar los movimientos con sus reclamos, ¿no? Todavía no
And
hemos
social
desarrollado
movements now have
o una
much
política suficientemente
more clarified limits
revolucionaria
as far
para
as what
poner en
their demands
crisis
can be.
esa matriz y ese corset que ha puesto el Fondo Monetario a las relaciones de clase en Argentina.
Okay, these limits that the IMF has placed on social classes and social movements.
Movimientos feministas también. Pero entonces, esa deuda empezó a depreciar la capacidad adquisitiva de los salarios
This debt has affected salaries, social programs that women mostly benefit from, debts of families and particularly women and women who are in charge of domestic economies, and an increase in horizontal violence, which is to say the precarization of people in their homes and in their territories, particularly the working class, and gender-related violence, but also other violences. This is also generating something that's also happened in Ecuador. The financialization has begun to create has begun to allow illegal economies, which is a big problem in Latin America. And this is a result of the IMF reforms. It's much more lucrative to sell drugs than to work all day. And of course, this increases violence. We have tried to struggle against IMF since the feminist organization started talking about economic and macho violence. There has been a reaction from news and media. Delegitimization of feminist movements and marches, claiming that feminists are now involved in politics as if that were an insult. We believe that the feminist movement has a lot of crucial points to offer to the external debt movement. There are 3 points I'd like to talk about now. 1, feminisms are capable of transversally organizing society. These organizations can participate in work, social, student movements of women in the countryside. This has allowed us to understand the collective impact of external debt on different sectors of society, what happens to the women in all of these different places, in the countryside, those who work for the state, etc. This is a type of working that is transversal. This is also very related to the types of politics that feminisms create. We have done this under different slogans. For example, alive, free, and not with debt. Different sectors have also adopted these slogans, for example, labor movements. These slogans have also opened the public debate about what is owed to us and not what we owe to others. This is a reversal of the meaning of debt. For example, the debt that the government owes to women, for example, for non-remunerated work, to indigenous women for expropriating their lands. For example, these slogans have allowed us to get out of the circus of social media ploys to legitimize them. La deuda es con nosotras means the debt is with us. We start with daily life. We don't talk about external debt
que solamente se restrinja a los números. No
in a
nos
way
interesa
that's only
solamente
limited
esa
to
discusión,
numbers. We're
porque
not
además es
interested
una
in that
discusión que muchas
discussion
veces
because that's a
sí que nos da
discussion
herramientas, pero que
that
muchas
may give
veces
us
nos deja en el
tools,
terreno del enemigo, ¿no?
but also makes us
Simplemente
enemies.
tratando de transformar toda la discusión del endeudamiento en números, es difícil
Trying to
apuntar a un
transform
proceso de
this
legitimación
discussion into
social.
only
Por
numbers
ejemplo, aquí la
makes it
extrema
difficult to
derecha
talk
ha
about the transformations
utilizado estrategias para
societally that
confundir
this
el
creates.
endeudamiento en moneda local con el endeudamiento con el Fondo Monetario, ¿no? Tratando de decir que eran los mismos tipos de deuda.
For example,
Nosotros
talking
debemos
about
preguntar como
foreign
dirigentes
debt
feministas
and
qué pasaba en
domestic
las
debt
casas
has been
que se paga
confused
esa deuda.
nationally in Argentina.
Pensamos que
But
los
we want to
cuerpos y
talk
familias
about
también
what's
son
happening
cuerpos
inside the
legislados.
houses
No
of people.
solamente diciendo, por ejemplo, que obviamente si el Estado recaudara dinero de
Obviously, if
otra
the
forma, que
state
otra sería la estructura tributaria,
found
no
other
tendría que
ways to
caer en
make money,
el endeudamiento,
it
y
wouldn't
también
fall into debt,
desconociendo el rol de los planes de austeridad,
and also
pero sí
denouncing austerity
focalizadas
programs.
en lo que pasaba en las casas. ¿Qué significa?
So that's
¿Qué
one
pasa
part, but
cuando
we
el
also want to talk about
Estado
what's going on inside the
dedica
homes. For
la
example, what
mayor cantidad de
happens
sus
when the
recursos a pagar la
government
deuda? ¿Cómo se empiezan a
dedicates
afectar esas economías domésticas?
most
¿Cómo
of its
se resiente
money
la calidad de
toward
vida?
paying
Y la
external debt?
importancia
How
de
does this
generar una
affect
reflexión
the quality of
desde la vida
life?
concreta. ¿Qué pasa con el transporte? ¿Qué pasa cuando vas
What
a la
happens
salud
to
pública y
public
tenés que pedir un
transport?
turno?
What
¿Cuánto tenés
happens
que
when
esperar?
you're going to get
¿Qué
public
pasa
medical
si
care and
no
you have
tenés
to wait
dinero
your turn? What
dejar a
happens
tus
when you
hijos
don't have
para tener
money,
para salir a trabajar?
when you
¿Cómo el
don't have
Estado
money to leave
está
your
destinando
children
ese
in child
recurso
care to go
hacia el
work?
pago de la deuda?
All of
Y eso
this,
creo que
all of these
ha
programs,
generado
their money is being
un
redirected toward
vocabulario
paying the debt.
particular desde los feminismos para abordar la deuda. Y
So this has
en ese
created a
sentido,
vocabulary
vamos a
among our
partir
feminist
también
movements for talking about
aportar
the
a un
external
proceso
debt.
de lucha general. Yo lo que voy a pedir es
And
que
we want
cuando
to
esté
connect
acabado
this
mi tiempo me
to
avisen
general
cuándo,
struggle.
porque así no me extiendo. No sé cuántos minutos me quedan.
Te quedan como entre 3 y 4
I would
minutos.
like to be
Perfecto.
informed a few minutes
¿Qué
before
quería compartir con
my
ustedes
time is up.
también? Algunas
What
acciones
else
que
do I
hemos
want
hecho
to share with you guys? Some of the actions that we've
que
undertaken
fueron importantes. Por ejemplo,
that
el
were
Fondo Monetario
important.
Internacional desde el
For example, the
2018
IMF
está
since
pidiendo en
2018 has
Argentina
been asking in
que el
Argentina
Estado deje
that the
de
state stop
jubilar mujeres. En Argentina hay una política muy agresiva
providing
que
retirement for
permite a las mujeres
women
que
in a
estuvieron muchos años
particular
cuidando
policy
o que
action,
estuvieron trabajando de formas informales,
particularly women
puedan,
who are in the informal sector.
que puedan acceder a una jubilación al mismo nivel que quienes tienen los aportes.
Right,
El
there was
Fondo
a program
Monetario
that
tiene una
allowed them to
política
have
feminista
regular retirement.
sistemáticamente
And the
en contra de ese
IMF
gasto, entre
is
comillas, previsional.
against this
Y eso permitió
provisional
generar un
expense.
antagonismo muy concreto entre el feminismo
And
y
so
el Fondo
there
Monetario.
is a
Hemos
very concrete
desarrollado
antagonism between the
campañas para
IMF
decirle
and
a
feminism.
las
We have
jubiladas, pero también
developed
a quienes están
campaigns
trabajando, el Fondo
to
Monetario
help
no
these
quiere que te
retired
jubiles,
women,
no quiere que llegues a tus años
in
de
which we
descanso.
tell these
Y
women,
hemos
the
conseguido,
IMF doesn't want you to
fijándonos
retire,
con los
doesn't want you to have your
sindicatos,
years of
impedir esas
rest.
reformas hasta el momento.
And we have succeeded
Pero hay
in
un
linking
antagonismo
this work
concreto. Se
to
trata también
labor
de generar
unions.
antagonismos concretos, de ver cuáles son las políticas que está pidiendo el fondo, pero generar alianzas con quienes van a ser
So we
afectados
are
por esas políticas
trying to
desde
create
ahí,
alliances
hacer
with those who are
pedagogía.
going to be
Quisiera finalizar
affected by
compartiendo con ustedes que hoy
these
nos
austerity
encontramos
programs
en
and from
un
there
momento
create
escenario
pedagogy.
catastrófico en Argentina
Now I'm
sin
going to share a
precedentes.
catastrophic
El
situation
Fondo
with you
Monetario
that doesn't have
Internacional está
precedent.
desarrollando una
The IMF is
política
developing a
casi
program
con vergüenza al gobierno de ultraderecha
that
y
is
sin
almost
ninguna vergüenza
embarrassing for the right-wing
públicamente de
government. It
apoyarlo. Sin embargo,
gives,
están muy
it's
contentos
embarrassing
porque el
to
gobierno de
publicly
ultraderecha
support this
tiene como
program,
base de su
but they're doing it
programa
anyway
político aplicar el ajuste del Fondo Monetario
because
de la
part
manera
of
más
their
cruel y más
ideological
rápida
program
posible
is
en
to
historia en
apply this
Argentina.
IMF
Sin embargo, el
austerity
Fondo Monetario
program in the
saca
most
documentos
brusque and
donde
abrupt way
invita al gobierno
possible.
de ultraderecha a
The
sacar esas
IMF have
políticas de manera más consensuada y sin desproteger a los sectores vulnerables. Pero es clarísimo
the
que
IMF has
no
a
podría haber un
discourse
gobierno de
of
ultraderecha
applying
en
these
Argentina si
programs
no fuera por
more
la presencia del
carefully,
Fondo Monetario.
but
El
it's very
Fondo
clear that this
Monetario
right-wing
ha
government would not exist without these
ahogado al gobierno
IMF
anterior,
programs.
que de todas maneras no hizo lo suficiente por investigar esa deuda ilegítima, pero ha ahogado al gobierno anterior sistemáticamente, promoviendo corridas cambiarias e inestabilidad política
Okay, the new government has chastised the previous government for not doing enough to address the debt. These policies have led the population of Argentina to elect Milei as president as a promise to be able to address this external debt. So the IMF is complicit. The IMF is complicit in bringing Milei and the right-wing government and creating a social genocide in Argentina. Thank you very much, Lucy, and we hope that your reflections will help generate questions. We want to continue watching closely what happens in Argentina and offer our solidarity to your movements. Now we're going to the presentation of Agnès. Agnès, what are the most effective strategies that will guarantee that these policies will keep in mind the human rights of women in Africa, and how is it impacting women in your region?
I was saying that the point of in Africa is a population that pays more the consequences of this debt. What is the strategy that it's most effective? In Africa, we have the debt and we have to understand how to use it. In every country, we have a strategy of the debt, of the commitment that it's in place, that understands how the movement of feminists, like they can be integrated or not. And anyway, it has to democratize the management of projects that should be financed by laws. We don't think that we include the women's social movements, that it's essential to ensure the relevance, reliability, and the ability of projects that meet the needs and prioritizes populations for indigenous development. So, if it doesn't meet these needs, the project must be rejected by the parliament. Feminist social movements and other civil society organizations can call these debt problems to be taken out of the insiders, because it has been always a taboo. They don't like that it's a competence and knowledge about this matter. The women's movement can also have a look of this and can make actions that can be involved in this. This debt is a question about a public matter, because it's a matter of rights, of women's rights, and this is the strategy that can be used and it needs to be used against the fight of the debt. The movement, feminist movement, has to say their needs, and
complètement hypothéquer le développement social et économique de l'Afrique à travers ce qu'on a souvent suivi, des projets à éléphants blancs et à travers les plans d'ajustement structurel qui continuent d'être proposés aux États africains, ainsi que d'autres politiques d'endettement qui accompagnent des accords de prêt. On a vu récemment avec la crise Covid 2019 comment les États africains ont été étranglés à
How,
cause de cette crise-là. Et les
how
conditions
African countries are facing
ne leur
the
ont pas permis
COVID-19
aujourd'hui de sortir l'Afrique
consequence.
de la pauvreté. L'Afrique continue à s'appauvrir et le développement ne suit pas. Donc, cela aussi hypothéqué le développement au niveau de l'Afrique, comme je disais, les prêts ne sont pas investis dans les priorités de développement des populations. On n'a pas de route, on n'a pas
We don't have
d'école,
a route,
on n'a
we
pas
don't
des
have a
infrastructures publiques, les unités de construction, de la construction des unités industrielles n'existent pas. Les conditionnalités qui sont imposées aux États africains continuent et permettent de réduire les dépenses publiques. Aujourd'hui,
today.
l'investissement
The
dans le
investment
secteur social n'est pas
that
visible
the
parce
sector,
que
social
les
sector
intérêts
is not
des
visible because the
grands
interests
financiers sont
of the
énormes.
partners, of the
Donc,
economic partners are
les documents de
huge.
stratégie même qui sont élaborés par
So the document of the strategies that is
les partenaires
elaborated
financiers ne
by the financial
correspondent
partners
pas
don't
aux besoins
correspond
des États,
to the
mais
needs of the
plutôt
state,
ces documents
but
sont donc là
more
pour défendre les intérêts de ces États, pour
for the interest of
financer
others of the state
leur
to
capital
finance
et non
their
le
capital.
développement des pays. Contrairement au message véhiculé par l'orthodoxie néolibérale, nous constatons que la dette et les mesures macroéconomiques qui lui sont associées ne sont absolument pas neutres. Bien au contraire, la dette constitue un obstacle à l'égalité au sein de la population. Les plans d'ajustement structurel imposés, comme je le disais, par la Banque mondiale FMI aux pays endettés du Sud pour assurer le remboursement de leurs dettes externes approfondissent la pauvreté. Et quand la pauvreté est là, c'est les femmes qui subissent. Donc, ils durcissent et aggravent les inégalités entre les sexes. Le plan d'ajustement structurel aujourd'hui en Afrique est rebaptisé cadre stratégique de lutte contre la pauvreté. Dans les années 90, était supposé enrayer tout processus d'émancipation de la femme. Mais aujourd'hui, on se rend compte que
Today we realize that this doesn't correspond to the question.
Nous avons imaginé 6 causes principales qui ont toutes des conséquences sur la femme des classes populaires. On a des variations au niveau de l'intensité de l'exclusion sociale. On a aujourd'hui la dette et les politiques qu'elle nous impose renforcent le patriarcat, le système millénaire d'oppression et de domination des femmes qui instaure une division sexuelle de travail, ce qui les confine, les femmes, dans un rôle d'éducatrice et de productrice de capital social humain. Elles se voient ainsi chargées d'assurer la reproduction sociale dans la société. On a les privatisations massives des entreprises qui ne favorisent pas l'implication de la femme. Aujourd'hui, on constate de fortes répressions au sein de la police, de la justice et de la défense. Les entreprises publiques des pays africains sont vendues et bradées à des vil prix afin de dégager au plus vite des liquidités destinées au remboursement de la dette. Au niveau, et l'une des causes aussi, on voit des restrictions drastiques des budgets sociaux. On n'a pas d'infrastructures sociaux, on n'a pas des infrastructures sanitaires, on n'a pas des infrastructures d'éducation, on n'a pas d'infrastructures de protection sociale, on n'a pas de logements sociaux, le transport en commun des populations est quasi inexistant, quasi non structuré, les infrastructures sont désuètes. Donc, voilà autant de choses qui font en sorte qu'on revienne. Alors, comment l'extractivisme impacte l'Afrique? Les ressources naturelles qui devaient constituer une ressource fiscale budgétaire pour les États africains, on ne voit pas le bénéfice de cette exploitation de notre or, ni de notre diamant, ni de notre bois. L'extractivisme aujourd'hui sert à générer des bénéfices pour rembourser la dette, ce qui fait qu'on donne la priorité à l'extractivisme, à l'agriculture commerciale au détriment de l'agriculture ouvrière. Non seulement c'est un manque à gagner pour nos États, mais aussi ça sert à générer des devises pour rembourser la dette de sorte que les priorités sont données à l'agriculture industrielle. Alors, les principales conséquences de ça, c'est que les populations, les communautés à la base sont dépossédées de leurs terres. Les communautés n'ont plus de moyens d'existence. On vit au jour le jour des phénomènes d'accaparement des terres. Les femmes n'ont pas accès aux terres. La pollution de l'environnement est récurrente. On a la pollution hydrique qui entraîne toutes les conséquences au niveau de la santé des femmes, des enfants, des jeunes. On a tout ce qui va avec, parce que avec ces institutions financières, tout doit être exporté. Donc, tout ce qui est produit, les cultures de rente sont destinées à l'exportation. Ça, c'est une grosse exigence des plans d'ajustement structurel qui nécessite, et ça, l'agriculture industrielle nécessite une grosse main-d'œuvre pour cultiver de plus grands espaces de production. Et les femmes ont dû, en plus de leur travail sur les cultures vivrières et dans les domaines reproductifs, travailler dans les champs de leur mari, ce qui s'accompagne d'une augmentation de leur charge de travail. Donc, voilà un peu l'une des conséquences de l'extractivisme. Maintenant, le leadership féminin. Le leadership féminin ici en Afrique, les femmes essayent de se formaliser dans les espaces. On prend par exemple la coordination des luttes féministes, qui est un groupe de femmes qui s'est constitué pour essayer de résoudre les problèmes d'éducation, d'échange, de communication, d'information et mener des actions citoyennes et construire des alternatives autour des injustices faites aux femmes. Et cette coordination des luttes féministes travaille aujourd'hui sur toutes ces questions-là. Question de l'endettement, question d'extractivisme, question de changement climatique, question d'autonomisation des femmes, question de participation à la vie économique, question de renforcer leur leadership au niveau social et au niveau politique. Elles prennent en main les problèmes des communautés, surtout celles vivant en milieu rural, pour travailler.
No sé, como que ellas en un momento se hacían las enojadas y la otra me hablaba por privado en otro tono, no sé, no importa. Ni me enrosco, pero es bastante... Nada, no importa.
Sí, Lucy, ¿se abrió tu micrófono?
Donc, c'est le mouvement féminin qui se sont formés.
This feminist movement that has been formalized with the that aborts the community problems. We as women have to organize to fight this, and how we socially are going to be organized as a community, because we have to recognize the capacity, the political capacity that we have to advance for this, but also is for us the occasion to see how to fight the public politic, Mm-hmm. Because we cannot let extractivists to take our natural resources. Because extractivism has put some unequal conditions for women, and this direction of political direction has threatened women and different actors of the population, and we have to reinforce the force that we have to reconstruct the structure of this, because Africa has been one of the most continents that has been affected most. So we have to organize as a community to keep fighting and to have an improvement for better life conditions.
Gracias, Agnes, por esta
Muchas
presentación.
Thank you, Agnes,
Este,
for this presentation.
Te voy a cambiar el audio. Ya. Gracias, Agnes, por tu participación, por darnos
Thank you
esta
for your
perspectiva
participation
tan
and giving
importante
us
de
this
la región
perspectives that
africana.
are so important
Ahora
on
quisiera
the
hacerle
African
algunas
region.
preguntas a Yolanda.
Now I'd like to ask a few
Yolanda,
questions
¿cuáles
to
son los
Yolanda.
impactos de género
Yolanda,
acumulados entre deuda y clima? ¿Y cuál
what
es
are
el
some of
rol
the
de
effects
Europa de
of
abordar la
women
crisis
and
de
climate
deuda
debt?
desde una perspectiva de género y de justicia climática?
How can we
Muy
combine
bien,
these
muchísimas
perspectives?
gracias. Espero que me
Thank you very
escuchen bien.
much. I hope you can hear me well.
Buenas tardes o buen día a todas y a todos.
Good day to
todos.
everyone.
Primero, gracias por invitarme a compartir este
Thank you for inviting me
espacio.
to participate.
Y segundo, iba a decir un mensaje de solidaridad a las compañeras de Argentina.
I want to send
Hoy
a
justo
message of
estábamos
solidarity
hablando con
to
una
all of
compañera
my
como
Argentine
esta
comrades.
complicidad del FMI con el gobierno de extrema derecha está llegando
The
a
complications of the
extremos
IMF and the
bastante
right-wing
descarados.
government is
Escuchando a
really
Agnès es algo
leading
no es nuevo, pero
to a
solo
terrible
Argentina,
situation. And listening to Agnes, I hear this is not something that's
está
new. It's not
acostumbrado a
something
engañar
that's just unique to
en todos los
Argentina. It's
países
something that
y no tiene
uh,
problemas con
has a long history
apoyar
in
a
other parts of the
gobiernos
world and
no
governments,
democráticos o
non-democratic
que
governments and
violentan
their
sus
relationships with the
poblaciones.
IMF, governments
Así que
that
toda mi
produce
solidaridad
violence against their
con todas
people.
vosotras.
And
Sobre
so
el
I
tema
send all my
de los
solidarity to
impactos
these
acumulados,
people.
nosotras venimos trabajando hace ya un
Talking
tiempo,
about
no
these
solo en
accumulated
Eurodad, sino con
effects, we
compañeras
have
de otras organizaciones,
been
por
talking
ejemplo,
about this not just with
Erasmus Mundus,
Eurodad, but other
Movement on Debt and Development, la gente de Debt Justice en Reino
organizations,
Unido, la gente de Latindad en
Climate Justice in
Latinoamérica y
London,
muchas otras compañeras,
many
sobre
other
ese círculo vicioso
organizations,
entre deuda,
this
fiscal y
vicious cycle
emergencia climática,
between
como
the
a mayor
emergency climate
endeudamiento, mayores
crisis and
posibilidades
debt.
de los países hacer frente a la emergencia
While
climática,
the
pero
debt
también
is
sobre
high,
cómo,
countries
por ejemplo,
have
la
less
financiación
capacity
para el
to
clima
confront
en
the
los
climate
países
crisis.
más contaminantes, los países responsables
And the
de la
countries that are
crisis
most
climática están
responsible for
obligados
creating this
a
crisis
está ofreciendo en forma de préstamos
are
y
offering
como la emergencia
loans
climática lo que está haciendo es
to
aumentar
countries most affected.
la deuda particularmente en los países del
And the
sur,
climate
con
crisis is only
acceso
incrementing
a
the debt
financiación en
in the
forma
global south.
de donaciones o en forma de reparaciones, ¿no? Dentro de ese círculo vicioso también nos hemos
And
focalizado
within
en
this
hacer
vicious
impactos
cycle,
específicos
we've also
sobre
tried to
las mujeres
address
y las minorías
women
de género,
and
¿no? Las
minorities,
compañeras
gender
Lucy
minorities.
y Agnès han hablado sobre los
Lucy and
impactos de
Agnes
la
have
deuda,
spoken
la
about
austeridad,
the
la
impacts of
privatización y
austerity
los
and
flujos de financiarización
privatization
vinculados a
and
la deuda
financialization
en los servicios
with
públicos,
with
en
external
esa
debt as far as it concerns social
deportación de fiscales que
programs,
comentaba Lucy. Agnès ha
salaries,
hablado de los servicios públicos que no
public
solamente siempre es a
services
causa de ese sobreendeudamiento y es evidente
that are
esa
no
razón
longer available due to this over indebtment.
en este espacio es muy evidente ese mayor
It's very
impacto
obvious
de esas
the
medidas de
major
austeridad
impact that
sobre
austerity
las
programs
mujeres y cómo
have
esas medidas de
on
austeridad
women
aumentan
and
el
how
trabajo no
austerity
remunerado
programs
y el cuidado de las
increase
mujeres, cómo el trabajo
non-remunerated work that women tend to
subremunerado,
do.
informal de mujeres trabajadoras, especialmente en el sector informal de cuidados, ¿no? Pero no solo eso, los países
It's not just that.
cuando aplican esas medidas de austeridad
When
cuentan con
countries
ese trabajo de
apply
las mujeres,
austerity
¿no? Cuentan
programs, they
con ese trabajo
count on women's non-remunerated
como
work
espacio para absorber el shock
as a way of absorbing the shock of these austerity programs. They know that society isn't going to fall because women are going to provide these caring work that the state stops providing. Women are going to become in charge with the education of young women that leave the school, elderly people who become when state programs diminish. This dependence of the state on women to absorb these shocks also extends to the climate sector, and I'm going to give some examples. I want to talk about more concrete because, as Lucy said, it's not about numbers, it's about people and lives. In the rural zones of the global south, women are responsible for finding food, water, oil, gas for cooking and warming homes. This is particularly affected when there are extreme climate events like floods and hurricanes and droughts. When these climate crises happen in a situation of over-indebtment, there is a double effect in the IMF is obligating countries to eliminate subsidies for energy and food, using the excuse of the climate crisis. It's not requiring large corporations to stop these subsidies, only to the private family sector. In the case of the health sector, that must, in climate crises, face affectations in the infrastructure. This is something that's very obvious, but we don't always immediately remember. We were speaking previously about how austerity measures and over-indebtment falls on the shoulders of informal workers and women in domestic zones and communities. This is also something that happens in emergency climate crises when there are climate impacts. For example, continued things like droughts. This also increases the work that's placed on women's shoulders. Another example, we wrote a very long text on this that we can share. It's open access. Another question is the higher risk of gender-based violence perpetrated by men that is particularly linked to debt and to the decrease in salaries and the elimination of services for protecting women and survivors of violence. We know because it's been widely proven that extreme climate events increase violence perpetrated against women. So these accumulated impacts become a vicious cycle, and they inform each other mutually. The link between debt and exploitation, and the extraction of fossil fuels and other natural resources. For example, minerals that are necessary for the energy sector For example, in Argentina, the IMF is asking for the extraction of, like Zambia and Pakistan, Argentina, all of these countries have minerals, and that the IMF is encouraging the extraction of in order to pay back the IMF. In Suriname, the agreement to restructure or recalibrate the repayment schema is done with private creditors, in which Suriname has to pay a certain percentage of a new drilling oil site in order to pay back these creditors. What is the role of Europe as a creditor? The first thing they do is block any initiative that could lead to the cancellation of debt. They're always increasing interest rates, not just for private creditors, but also for the creditor countries. And how banks are buying these credits and bonds owned by that are linked to the debts of countries in the global south. This is also done indirectly due to the fact that they hold the most representation in organizations like the IMF. The United States and Europe have the majority of the votes in the IMF and have veto power. The other role that Europe could play as a holder of debt, particular historical and climate debt that they owe toward the global south, has to do with the fact that they don't comply with the accords of organizations like the United Nations as far as their emissions. On top of that, they offer loans with exorbitant interest rates, which goes completely against what their historical responsibility is toward the climate crisis. Especially because so many of the agreements that they enter into with global south countries have to do with geopolitics and booming industry. This is called the financialization of the climate crisis. Geopolitical strategies for access to energy and resources. For example, this is called the Global Gateway, is a project about investing with public European money in global south countries, many of which are in Africa and Latin America, through loaning or loans given to these countries that eventually will support the energy transition in Europe, but not in global south countries. What should be the role of women in defining these programs? Europe absolutely ignores the role of leadership of women in these programs.
cuál es el impacto sobre las migrantes y refugiadas.
What is the impact on
De alguna
migrants and
manera se ve doblemente
refugees
también ese
that
impacto
also
de las
doubly
deudas, que en muchos
suffer
casos hemos visto
due
cómo
to
las
the
crisis de deuda
external
en los
debt
países del
crisis?
sur han supuesto movimientos migratorios, también de mujeres para
Migrant
trabajar
movements,
en
as
el
well as
sector,
those of women,
especialmente de los cuidados,
laborers who are
infrarremunerado,
looking
y
for
en el sector informal en
domestic care
Europa, y cómo
jobs
cuando
in
llegan
Europe.
a Europa,
When they
también
arrive
a
in
causa de
Europe,
esas crisis de deuda que también tenemos
also
acá,
due to the
se
debt
les niegan
crisis,
derechos
they
de
are
acceso
denied
a la sanidad
rights,
pública o a,
access to healthcare,
a los servicios públicos del
and
Estado,
public
¿no? Y cómo
services
en
provided
ese
by the
sentido
state.
se revictimiza a las mujeres migrantes
So this
que
is why
ya tuvieron
migrants
que
live
huir
a
de
double
una crisis de la deuda
victimization.
para ir a parar a una Europa también sobreendeudada, que también aplica medidas de austeridad y que también
They live austerity, the effects of austerity in their home country and in Europe.
del sector público. Lo voy a
And they
dejar aquí
doubly
porque
live the
también tengo mucho que
financialization
decir,
of
así que cualquier cuestión,
the
encantada de
debt
responder.
crisis. And any question I'm ready
Muchas
to
gracias,
respond to.
Yolanda.
Thank you,
Justo
Yolanda.
sí es muy importante para
It's
nosotras
really
entender
important for
quiénes son
us
nuestros
to
aliados,
understand
aliadas
who are
en el
our
norte global, reconocer
alliances
las
in the global
presiones en los
north,
centros de poder desde donde emergen todas las
and
violencias a los otros
to be able to
territorios.
put pressure in the
Muchas gracias
metropole
por
and close
compartir
to
nuestra
centers of
lucha.
power. So thank you so much for
Y
sharing
pasamos
these
con la
thoughts.
última compañera,
Now we're
con
going to
Shereen.
go with
Mucho gusto
Shereen.
por tenerte por acá. Y te queremos preguntar,
It's great to have you
te
here,
queremos
Shereen.
preguntar qué
We
cambios
want to
crees
ask
necesarios en la
you,
arquitectura del sistema financiero global
what
para abordar
changes
la
do you
crisis
think
de
are
deuda desde una
necessary
perspectiva feminista y de justicia climática.
in
Y
the
también
global
cómo
structure to
impacta la
address
deuda en los
external debt
poderes
and
de
climate
MENA y de la
crises?
región,
And
las
how
mujeres
do
periféricas
these
en general.
affect the women in the MENA region?
Yes, thank you for having me today. And I'm happy to be among sisters and comrades. Allow me to switch my interpretation channel, not to hear myself in another language. Thank you. Well, I mean, as my colleagues already mentioned, and I have to emphasize on this, the local movements, the regional movements, and the global movements, the feminist movement has to be more integrated and to adopt the fight against debt and its I always say the faithful sons of debt austerity measures. And there is different, of course, what I believe in for the global economical structure to be not only hold accountable, but also to transform the whole system to a green, feminist, just system. And unfortunately, and I'm going to say this, but we have an opportunity as feminists in that moment because of the crisis, because of the I'm not only speaking about the debt crisis or the economical crisis or the climate crisis. I'm also speaking about the genocide that is happening in Palestine, that actually give us a reveal opportunity to see the world or the system as it is. The system is not standing for the global south. The system is standing for investments and benefit and market and all the neoliberal capitalism senses that we are facing from the first beginning of the colonialism history till this moment. So I only see the solution in transforming this system. In facing this system, not with alternatives, but with more radical structures and policies. And by here, I mean different approaches, but I believe that starting with addressing the colonial policies still now that the international financial institutions are imposing on us at the Global South is a must. We sometimes quote in the daily basis work advocating for the justice, for feminist approach. Within that system, we forget where we come from. We forget what is our discourse, what is our anti-colonial, decolonial discourse. It's very important to remember not only to get caught on technicalities and trying to get out of the unfair system, and to do some regulations to create an instrument within the UN system, which is, for example, I'm giving an example, which is necessary, yes, but in parallel with this is not enough anymore. I believe what is need to happen to this global system is, beside the structural work, is a political approach, and that needs a feminist movement, a strong feminist movement from the local ground to the global movement. And I am not only addressing feminists from feminist movement from the Global South, but also addressing comrades and colleagues and sisters from the Global North, because that needs to be a strong collective fight, starting with delinking. And I understand how it seems a dream or a radical discourse, but it's not actually far from reality and far from achievement if there is a political will, especially after what is happening now. And shape our political approach towards reparation not only for climate crisis when we addressing that, but also reparation for years and years of colonialization that we are still living under. We had a discussion recently with other colleagues. Yolanda also was there on is it a new colonial approach, or it's still the same colonial approach but with different instruments? It's still the same colonial approach with different instruments. Speaking about the movement from the MENA region, in 2011, when the Arabic Spring happened, the revolution, I'm Egyptian, so during the Egyptian revolution, the feminist movement was in the heart of the movement and the revolution, asking for bread, freedom, and social justice. And we all understand the philosophy behind feminism here, which is, from my perspective, is the most inclusive approach towards justice. At the end of the day, feminism means justice for all, social justice for all. So the feminist movement was in the heart of the revolution and still trying to build on that. That's why, for example, we had our MENA Fem movement for economic development and ecological justice, trying to build on this small struggles and fights that happened from way before the Arabic Spring, but it was obviously and concrete, I can say, steps during the revolution, and we are trying to build on this from the local to the regional to the global movement. Going back to austerity and how not only the austerity measures that is part of or يعني development a natural development of the debt crisis, our communities, unfortunately we are living under a severe patriarchal system that doesn't recognize how the women is and was and will be the rescue for all the economical crisis that our countries are living under. Still, this patriarchal system doesn't appreciate or understand the care work that women provide to these communities. For example, in Morocco, during the economical crisis, this economical system in Morocco didn't feel the impact because of the informal sector contribution in the economy that was led by women. During the global pandemic, the COVID-19, the situation escalated further and has made a clear certainty of care for life, and the preservation of this planet, and the functioning of economics and societies. And it revealed how our communities are leaning on care economy that is usually provided by women. Austerity measures, including cuts on public services like health, education, social welfare, first of all impact women in our region, who are forced into structures and unfortunately naturalize care as their sole responsibility and valuable. So women are forced to take on more care responsibilities, making participating in paid work or education challenging. Moreover, care work remains unpaid, primarily unrecognized, invisible, and increasingly privatized and commodified as a source of profit for corporation. In our region, for example, there is a phenomena that if you search in Jordan or Egypt, you will find the same situation. This phenomena called the bread providers, women bread providers. Women are the main care, not only care, are main bread winners for the family. And I'm speaking to up to 80% of families in the Egypt and come after that Jordan, that women are the service providers for the family. And when you dig more, you will find, for example, in Egypt, being this service provider created another dilemma, which is women in debt, or in Arabic, al-gharimat. Women in debt is also a phenomena in Egypt, where women are when women are most visitors to prisons, because they are the most indebted people because they provide to the family. And you will find many researchers and many literature around women in debt. So that was only created because of the unrecognition of the care economy, the unrecognition of the feminist economy, and the unrecognition of the impacts of the debt crisis in general. And it will keep moving like that if we don't have a more radical political approach addressing this debt crisis. I believe that recognizing the impacts on unsustainable debt on women and prioritizing care to achieve debt justice is essential. This means providing social protection and support for marginalized and marginalized communities, including different kind of domestic work. I mean, part of the crisis is domestic, within also the domestic debt, but and another part of the crisis, not only domestic debt, but also labor laws that is not fair for women, different laws, the patriarchal system, but also the external debt and sovereign debt crisis is, I believe, is a major first, and that leads to what the crisis that is happening domestically. So I don't want to repeat what my already colleagues mentioned, but again, I emphasize that the solution for this is needs to be a feminist solution, need to be a political plus a structural radical solution to be able to have a respectable life under this global system. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shereen, for these perspectives and also for bringing us the anti-colonial lens to address this important problem of debt and all patriarchal violence. Now we're going to pass to the part where we will do both questions. It's not Q&A, it's both questions and also reflections.
I'm going to start to speak in Spanish. We're going to start taking questions, so if you could please raise your hand so we can converse, and that you use your microphone on your headset to help facilitate the work of the translators. As I mentioned, these can be reflections from your own spaces or towards the presenters. There was one question that was about why in Argentina Milei was elected. We can ask this of Lucy Caballero. Can you hear me? Yes. Great. There's not only one cause. It's a big debate. There are many types of theories. I think that something we agree on is that there's an economic crisis since many years in Argentina that has to do with the IMF. And this has created a really important problem of disorganization of daily and domestic life. When I mentioned earlier of the depreciation of salaries, I'm talking about something very extreme, not talking about inflation levels in the world or during the pandemic. I'm talking instead about people who get a certain salary and we don't know how much we're going to be able to buy with that salary from one day to another. Instability from constant instability, a lot of uncertainty about daily life. One of Milei's proposals was to increase inflation through dollarization, which was also a policy that began during the military dictatorship, which instated in Argentines a fantasy about the United States and dollars through so this was a fantasy about stability for many people and also brings about the dream of ending with inflation. The failure of Perón and now of the far right, Milei appeared with a proposal that would give a radical solution, especially because the progressives were so lukewarm in their proposals. And when Milei arrived, also he brought strategies about blaming all of the societal ills on the spendings of politicians. So now what he's doing is taking the IMF plan to a radical place, so much so that it's the first time that the Argentine state pays more in paying the interest, and many who supported him and voted for him are now living out the effects of his presidency. We still don't have an alternative leftist project that could really convince the majority of Argentines. Thank you, Lucy, for your response. Very clear. And also we want to reiterate our solidarity with the Argentine people that are struggling against a far right-wing government. Does someone else have a question or reflection they can put in the chat? Scarlett.
Gracias, Alicia. Thank you, everyone, and thank you to our amazing speakers for sharing so much valuable information. I have a question. Maybe one of our speakers can explain a little bit how the climate movement can link with the feminist movement, and how the climate crisis is affecting more the feminine bodies than the others. It would be amazing if we can have more details, maybe examples on this. Thank you.
Would one of our speakers like to respond to this question?
Well, I can go on quickly, and maybe my colleagues can add. But for example, 2 months ago here in Morocco, there was, I can say, a big, not only a demonstration, but a big uprising for only women. Thousands of women went out in Figig. Figig is in so far in the south, near the borders with Algeria, because of water. Because Morocco is part of the countries that are under water distress. And because women are the most impacted, as usual, from the climate crisis, and we are facing a severe climate complications and climate crisis and global warming measures, lack of rain and resources of water that is impacting daily life, because we are still in rural places in the global south, in the MENA region. Women go and fetch for water every day to be able to drink, to be able to bath, to be able to to support their families, that is women's responsibility. And because of many things, including, I mean, the climate crisis, but also including different projects and investment that is extracting our water resources from the international financial institutions. Our colleague Yolanda, for example, mentioned the Global Gateway, and this is part of it. Also, the different irrigation projects that is funded by the World Bank in the region, extracting our water resources that is impacting directly women. So they were there in the streets for years, for days and days, asking for access to water, and they were only women. And giving the fact that also, again, women are the service providers always for the care system. They go and work on the fields without having any kind of payment or any recognition or any protection or يعني it's a guaranteed thing for the family that they are supporting in the farm work, for example. So that is also women who need access to water. And if we open the scope to different kind of things, you will find that it's only women, not only women, but women are the majority who pays the bill of the climate crisis. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shereen. We are reaching the end of our event, but Agnes, maybe if you want to add something very little before we have to wrap up. Fortunately, we had little time for questions. If not, bueno, en caso de que no,
If not, we're at the end of our event. We would like to thank everyone for their participation, particularly our translators that are Susana, Katie, and Eric.
Sorry, if you want, you can briefly share your reflections then, but very briefly because we're already reaching the end of the event.
In any case, we'll continue closing up the event. Thank you so much to our interpreters, Susana, Katy, and Eric. Without them, we would not have been able to do this event in an inclusive way and listen to each other in our own languages. We hope that you have liked this. We did this with a lot of care. Please forgive our technical issues. We think that it was a very interesting and important discussion, particularly this week, especially in the week where we're going to have the International Women's Workers' Day. Thank you for being here. We need to remember that we're going to have a recording of this event on YouTube and in our social media accounts. Hugs to everyone.